Before Pompeii became a name for sudden ruin, it was a town of errands, steam, bargaining, laundry, bread, and small remarks left on plaster walls. In its streets, water moved from fountain to basin, carts wore grooves into stone, and shop counters opened onto the morning light. What survives there is unusually gentle in its honesty, not the grand language of emperors, but the ordinary record of how a Roman city ate, washed, worked, and passed the day. And in the decades before AD 79, Pompeii was a thriving Roman town of perhaps 10 to 20,000 people, large enough for bustle and anonymity, small enough for daily routines to remain close to the ground. Rebuilt and reshaped under Roman rule, and still carrying the signs of repair after the earthquake of AD 62, it was a place of patched walls, renewed facades, and work still in progress. It was neither a village nor an imperial capital, and that middle scale is part of what makes it feel so intimate now. The city seems to preserve not ceremony at its grandest, but the ordinary arrangement of a morning beginning again. Before shutters were fully opened and counters wiped down, the day depended on water. A branch of the aqueduct fed Pompeii, and from the Castellum Aquae that supply was distributed outward to baths, some private houses, workshops, and more than 25 street fountains. For many residents, especially those without piped water at home, the corner fountain was one of the first destinations of the day, where jars were filled and the sound of falling water entered the street before conversation had quite gathered around it. From there, the eye drops to the paving stones themselves, worn by traffic and weather into a surface that still feels practical underfoot. Deep wheel ruts run through many streets, and the raised stepping stones that interrupt them show how people crossed while runoff, washing water, animals, and daily waste moved slowly along the roadway. Pompeii's streets were not idealized marble avenues. They were useful, damp, noisy surfaces, edged by curbs and doorways, and the archaeology has kept that plain texture with unusual honesty. Along these same routes, the walls became another kind of record. More than 11,000 graffiti have been found in Pompeii, much of it informal and unliterary. Greetings, jokes, tallies, game boards scratched into plaster, advertisements, and electoral notices painted or written where people would see them in passing. Together, they suggest a town in which walls were expected to be read, answered, and added to, and in which spoken Latin, quick and casual, lingered in public view. Further along streets, such as the Via dell'Abbondanza, commerce and domestic life stood almost shoulder to shoulder. House fronts opened directly onto workshops, bars, and small retail spaces, so that a passerby might move in a few minutes from a shrine at a corner to a fountain basin, from a family doorway to a sales counter, without crossing any sharp boundary between home and business. In the years after the earthquake, this flexibility became especially visible. The house of Julia Felix, partly an elite residence and partly an income-generating property with baths and rentable rooms or suites, seems to show an owner adapting to new conditions, rather than preserving an older plan for dignity alone. It offers a quiet image of Pompeii in its last decades, not fixed ceremonially in stone, but adjusting, subdividing, repairing, and continuing with the day. To enter Pompeii's food trade is to step first into the bakeries, of which at least 31 are known, where production and sale were arranged in a compact, almost unbroken sequence. Near the street, there might be a counter, Behind it, the kneading room. Further in, the oven. And beside these, the heavy lava stone mills whose hourglass form is now one of the city's most familiar silhouettes. Turned by animal or human labor, they reduced grain to flour in spaces that were practical rather than picturesque, dusted pale, warm from effort, and close enough to the doorway that the life of the street was never far away. In larger establishments such as the bakery of Modestus and in the bakery of Sotericus, the working layout still reads with unusual clarity, as if the day's routine had only briefly paused. Even the bread itself seems to linger nearby. Carbonized loaves, including the neatly divided panis quadratus, preserve not only a recipe, but a rhythm. Dough portioned, scored, baked, and set out for ordinary purchase in the course of an ordinary morning. From the bakeries, the path leads easily to the Thermopolia, the street-side food counters where large jars were sunk into masonry and ready-to-serve meals stood close to hand. Nearly 100 are known in Pompeii, and places such as the Thermopolium of Vetutius Placidus or that of Asalina suggest a town in which eating was often quick, public, and woven into movement through the streets, not reserved for the formal dining room of a house. Here the tastes of Pompeii come into softer focus. Hot dishes, wine, preserved foods, and the sharp, savory presence of fish sauce. The garum workshop of the Umbrici reminds us how central fermented fish condiments were to Roman cooking, and how much archaeology can recover of a commercial kitchen that literature passes over lightly. Amphorae, jars, counters, and food remains make trade visible at the level of containers, spills, residues, and repeated handling, where commerce becomes less an abstract market than a set of surfaces worn smooth by use. Indoors, the household kitchen was usually modest, smoky, and entirely workmanlike, often tucked behind more elegant reception rooms whose painted walls have long drawn more attention. Hearths, storage jars, grinding tools, drains, and nearby latrines show how Roman domestic comfort depended on compact service spaces, where heat, water, and waste had to be managed carefully every day. Further along this chain of labor came the cloth trade, preserved especially well in the Folonica of Stephanus, where a former house was converted into a laundry. Their cloth was washed and finished in vats with water, alkaline substances, and collected urine, then dried upstairs, a necessary industry sustained by strong smells and repetitive labor that polite writing usually prefers to keep at a distance. Set beside this is Pompeii's broader textile economy of woolworking, dyeing, and laundering, substantial enough that the building of Eumachia in the Forum, so composed and refined in its public face, was likely connected to the wool trade or the Fuller's Guild. In Pompeii, even graceful architecture could rest quietly on the daily business of feeding, cleaning, and clothing the city. From workshops and kitchens, the day leads naturally toward the baths, and in Pompeii, the Stabian baths stood ready at the meeting of important streets, old, substantial, and woven into the city's traffic by the line of shops set along their front. Bathing here was less a single act than a sequence with its own patient tempo. Clothing set aside in the changing room, the body eased through warm air into hotter chambers, then returned at last to the cold plunge with conversation, scraping, oil, and intervals of exercise around the edges of the routine. The rooms themselves, with their basins, benches, vaults, and traces of heating systems still suggest a practiced movement repeated day after day. Cleanliness mattered, certainly, yet the baths also offered a civic pause, a place where errands slowed and the city's many ranks came into contact under the same roof. That shared habit depended on the same water system that fed Pompeii's fountains and houses, so that private refreshment rested on public engineering. Aqueduct, distribution tanks, lead pipes, drains, boilers, and furnaces belonged to one connected urban metabolism, and the bathhouse made that connection visible. In such places, status did not disappear, nor did wealth cease to matter, yet distinctions could soften for an hour within a common architecture of heat, moisture, and stone. Further on, returning into the houses themselves, one sees a similar doubleness. The guest encountered painted reception rooms, atria open to the sky, carefully framed garden views, and polished surfaces arranged to express steadiness and taste. Behind them lay kitchens darkened by smoke, storage rooms with jars and amphorae, service corridors, workspaces, and the compact quarters in which servants, dependents, and family members carried the repetitive labor that made elegance possible. Toward evening, the small survivals begin to speak more quietly than the grand rooms do. Household shrines in corners, worn counters, bronze tools, clay lamps, cooking vessels, and modest tableware suggest meals assembled without ceremony from bread, olives, fruit, fish sauce, and wine, with water drawn, carried, or stored nearby against the heat. Clothing is cleaned and folded, lamps are trimmed, doors open again onto the street, and the boundary between household and neighborhood remains gently porous. Pompeii preserves these textures unusually well because ash-fixed room layouts together with the objects that once lay within them. Even the graffiti, scratched in entrances, stairwells, shop fronts, and places of leisure, remain as the city's most human murmur, preserving flirtation, recommendation, irritation, and memory in quick strokes rather than polished prose. Excavated from the 18th century onward, Pompeii changed the study of antiquity for this reason above all. It revealed not only temples and monuments, but baths, ovens, laundries, taverns, drains, and the modest arrangements of daily existence. A day here still feels inhabitable because the city was preserved not at its most ceremonial, but in the middle of ordinary life. What Pompeii preserves so well is not only a city interrupted, but a city inhabited. Its ovens, counters, courtyards, drains, and scratched messages still hold the shape of repeated habits, and in that quiet repetition, the ancient world feels less remote, as if the day had only just stepped out and might return by evening.